In Canada, the role of a husband is built on trust, protection, and the quiet promise that home is the one place you should feel safe. But every so often, a case emerges that shatters that promise into something unrecognizable. Tonight, we look at the husbands who didn't just break their vows. They betrayed their families, their communities, and the very idea of what a partner is meant to be. These aren't stories of momentary rage. These are cases that haunted entire provinces, shook courtrooms, and changed the way Canada understands danger inside the home. This is a journey into the darkest side of marriage, and the husbands whose actions echo through Canadian history. Before we begin, tell me in the comments which province you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive. Now, let's start with the first case. Peter Demeter, Mississauga, 1973. The night of July 18, 1973, began like any other summer evening in Mississauga's wealthiest neighborhoods. But by 11 p.m., police officers were gathering inside the garage of an upscale home on Dundas Crescent, staring at a scene that would become one of Canada's most infamous domestic crime investigations. 33-year-old Christine Demeter lay face down beside her car, her skull shattered from repeated blows with a heavy object. Detectives noted the strange staging. The garage door mechanism appeared tampered with. The car's battery was dead, and nothing seemed stolen. To investigators, it felt less like a spontaneous attack and more like someone had choreographed every detail. They didn't say it that night, but within days suspicion was moving toward one person, her husband, real estate developer Peter Demeter. To understand why police started looking at him, you have to go back to the beginning of his life in Canada. Peter arrived from Hungary in 1956 after fleeing political unrest. He was young, ambitious, and determined to build wealth in a country he hoped would offer stability and reinvention. By the early 1960s, he had become a rising star in Ontario's real estate world. He drove luxury cars, attended charity galas, and cultivated an image of a man who had escaped hardship and transformed himself into a success story. In 1967, he married Christine, a striking Austrian-born model. Together, they looked like a couple straight out of a magazine spread. They bought a new home in Mississauga, welcomed a daughter, and joined the upper-class social circles of the time. But beneath the glamorous facade, their marriage was deteriorating. Friends later told investigators that arguments had become common. Christine was distressed about Peter's increasingly distant behavior and rumors of his involvement with another woman, an Austin. Tryon model he met during business travels, circulated quietly among acquaintances. In the months leading up to Christine's death, the tension became more visible. She confided to a friend that she feared her husband was planning to leave her, and she mentioned discovering airline tickets, one for Peter and one for another woman. The friend kept the tickets for safekeeping, a detail that would later become crucial when investigators tried to understand motive. On the day Christine died, nothing seemed dramatically unusual. She went shopping, returned home, and expected Peter to arrive later in the evening. When he opened the garage door, he told police he immediately saw her lying beside the car. The injuries were catastrophic, consistent with multiple blows from a heavy blunt object. Detectives noticed the position of her body, the state of the vehicle, and the unusual condition of the garage equipment. It felt staged, but at first they said nothing publicly. Instead, they quietly expanded their investigation. Early on, police learned about Peter's relationship with the other woman. They also noted the large life insurance policy taken out on Christine, a detail that raised eyebrows. The combination of financial strain, marital breakdown, and potential jealousy pushed investigators to look deeper. As detectives followed Peter's business connections, his links to organized crime figures in Montreal drew attention. Anonymous tips came in, suggesting he had discussed wanting Christine out of the way. One former associate, who later testified in court, claimed Peter approached him months earlier asking if he knew anyone who could arrange a killing. That witness described several disturbing proposals, from trying to engineer an accident to outright hiring a violent enforcer. None of these claims had been verified at the time, but they were enough to justify wiretaps, informants, and a broader surveillance effort. Through these methods, investigators began piecing together a story of a supposed contract killing arranged through criminal intermediaries. Although the suspected assailant was never identified or charged, the Crown developed a compelling theory. Someone had been hired to wait in the garage and strike Christine when she entered. The staging was meant to make it appear like a tragic household mishap or a break-in gone wrong. By 1974, the case against Peter was ready. He was charged with first-degree murder, with the Crown arguing he had orchestrated the killing for financial gain and freedom from a collapsing marriage. The trial that followed became the longest in Canadian history at that time. Dozens of witnesses testified, including informants who claimed Peter spoke openly about wanting Christine gone. They recounted stories of him brainstorming violent scenarios, seeking out connections who could assist, and expressing frustration with his personal life. Peter maintained his innocence and chose not to testify. His defense argued that the Crown's witnesses were unreliable, many with criminal backgrounds or personal animosity. They also emphasized that no physical evidence tied Peter directly to the scene and that the alleged hitman was never found. The cumulative weight of testimony, the life insurance policy, the marital strain, the mistress, and the elaborate staging of the crime scene painted a portrait the jury could not ignore. In December 1974, the jury found Peter Demeter guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Canada was captivated. High society crimes were unusual, and this one had every ingredient: wealth, betrayal, organized crime, and a young woman whose life ended violently inside her own home. The media covered every phase, from the investigation to the verdict, describing the case as a haunting example of privilege masking darkness. Yet Peter's story didn't end with that conviction. While incarcerated, he became involved in further criminal conspiracies. In the early 1980s, he was charged and later convicted of arranging plots that targeted individuals connected to his past, one involving an attempted abduction, another tied to an arson plan. These added convictions resulted in additional life sentences and solidified his reputation as one of Canada's most persistent and manipulative offenders. For decades, he periodically returned to public attention through parole hearings, each one reopening the story of Christine's death. Parole board decisions consistently emphasized his ongoing risk, his history of plotting violent acts even from behind bars, and his lack of insight into his own behavior. Today, more than 50 years after Christine's killing, Peter remains incarcerated. The case continues to be studied in legal circles for its complex use of informants, surveillance, and circumstantial evidence. And it remains in the public memory as one of the most chilling husband-orchestrated crimes in Canadian history, a reminder of how a polished life can conceal a deeply destructive force behind closed doors. Mohammad Shafia, Kingston, 2009. The interrogation room inside Kingston Police Headquarters was quiet, except for the click of a recorder and the rustle of papers being placed on the table. Investigators slid photographs toward Mohammad Shafia, images of hydrology diagrams, underwater recovery shots, and collision analysis reports. Shafia kept insisting the deaths of his 3 teenage daughters and his first wife were tragic accidents. Detectives calmly explained that every piece of physical evidence showed the opposite. The car recovered at Kingston Mills Locks had not drifted, rolled, or gone into the water by mistake. Its damage patterns, water entry angle, and the position of the bodies all demonstrated that the event had been staged. Shafia listened without emotion. When asked about his daughter's behavior, he remarked that they had brought shame, a comment investigators later considered significant in establishing motive. To understand why this statement mattered, it's necessary to step into the dynamics of the Shafia household. Mohammad Shafia, an Afghan-born businessman, moved his family to Canada in 2007. He lived with 2 spouses, his first wife, Rona Amir, and his second wife, Tuba Yahya. Because polygamy wasn't legally recognized in Canada, Rona was publicly described within documents and introductions as a domestic helper, although those inside the family knew she held the role of first wife. Together, the household included 7 children and followed rigid rules shaped by tradition and strict expectations around conduct. Over time, the 3 eldest daughters, Zainab, Sahar, and Giti, found themselves increasingly at odds with those expectations. School officials later described them as bright, social, and interested in integrating into Canadian life. Yet they showed signs of distress. There were documented attempts by the girls to seek help from teachers, social workers, and youth protection authorities. Zainab wished to make her own choices in friendships and clothing. Sahar confided in school staff that she feared repercussions at home. Giti ran away more than once and expressed clear unhappiness during interviews with counselors. Rona also kept diaries in which she described feeling trapped and emotionally cornered, hoping for a future where she and the girls could live more freely. On June 30th, 2009, the situation reached a devastating endpoint. Early that morning, a black Nissan Sentra was spotted submerged at the bottom of the Kingston Mills locks. When police divers entered the water, they discovered 4 bodies inside, Zainab, Sahar, and Giti in the front and middle rows, and Rona in the 3rd row. All seatbelts were unfastened. At first glance, the crash could have been mistaken for a simple misadventure. The area had roads leading toward the locks, and the drop-off point was accessible. But several details stood out immediately. The vehicle rested squarely on its wheels, suggesting a controlled descent. The ignition was off, the windows were closed, and the victims had no injuries consistent with attempting to break glass or escape. These early observations raised concerns that the crash was not accidental. When questioned, the family presented a story. They claimed to have been on a trip to Niagara Falls and believed one of the daughters had taken the Sentra and driven off at night. But police quickly saw inconsistencies. Cell tower records placed the family's movements near the locks earlier than they stated. Video surveillance from nearby businesses captured the family vehicles in locations that contradicted their timeline. And forensic inspection of the family's second vehicle, a Lexus SUV, revealed front-end damage that matched marks on the rear of the Sentra, suggesting contact between the 2 CEA. Investigators launched a multidisciplinary reconstruction. Hydrology experts examined water flow and entry angles. Collision specialists analyzed the scrape marks on the underside of the Sentra. All findings aligned. The car had been pushed from the edge rather than having rolled into the water on its own. Drag marks matched the concrete lip of the lock. The force required to move the vehicle was consistent with another car applying pressure. The evidence showed planning, positioning, and a deliberate placement. As the investigation deepened, authorities obtained authorization for a wiretap to monitor conversations inside the home. Over several weeks, they recorded exchanges between Shafia, Tuba, and their son, Mohammad. In these recordings, the family discussed the ongoing investigation and expressed concern about police scrutiny. One line from Shafia later became widely quoted during the trial. "Nothing is more valuable than my honor." Another recording captured frustration about the daughter's behavior, reinforcing the Crown's theory of motive, rooted in control and perceived family reputation. With the forensic evidence pointing toward staging and the wiretap recordings revealing motive and coordination, police proceeded with arrests. On July 22, 2009, officers apprehended Mohammad, Shafia, Tuba Yahya, and Hamed. All 3 were charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. They consistently denied involvement and repeated the explanation of an accidental crash. The Crown, however, prepared a case that combined physical evidence, expert testimony, cell site data, surveillance footage, and recorded conversations into a cohesive narrative of planned homicide. The trial began in October 2011 at the Kingston courthouse. Over several months, jurors heard from more than 50 witnesses. Expert testimony demonstrated how the Sentra's damage aligned with the Lexus's failures, ront end marks. Hydrology experts explained that the car could not have entered the water in the way described by the defense. School officials and social workers provided context about the girls' prior attempts to seek help, and forensic pathologists confirmed that the victims had no injuries indicating a struggle inside the vehicle, suggesting they were unable to react at the moment of submersion. The defense challenged aspects of the forensic findings and questioned the translations of the wiretap recordings. They maintained that the crash could still have occurred without a deliberate push, and argued that the conversations were taken out of cultural context. However, the totality of evidence provided a clear timeline and motive. The family had planned the event, coordinated movements that night, and presented a false narrative afterward. On January 29, 2012, after deliberating for 15 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts for all three accused. Each was sentenced to life imprisonment with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. The verdict was widely covered across Canada, with many expressing sorrow for the four victims and concern over the warning signs that had been missed prior to their deaths. In the years that followed, the Shafia family mounted several appeals, arguing procedural errors and issues with translation. All appeals were ultimately rejected, and the convictions remained intact. The Supreme Court of Canada declined to hear further challenges. Today, the Shafia case stands as one of the most thoroughly documented family homicides in Canadian legal history. It reshaped discussions in law enforcement, social services, and community organizations about identifying risk indicators and protecting vulnerable family members. The evidence collected, from cell data to hydrological mapping, remains a landmark example of how methodical investigation can uncover a carefully concealed crime. Mark Peter Hutt, Ottawa, 2009. When paramedics entered the Ottawa home on December 6, 2009, they stopped in shock. In the cluttered basement, on a thin mattress placed directly on the floor, lay 33-year-old Donna Jones. Her body was covered in catastrophic burns, deep cuts, fractures, and injuries that clearly had not been treated. She was already gone. Standing nearby, her husband, Mark Peter Hutt, calmly told them she had slipped and fallen in the bathtub. The explanation didn't fit anything they were seeing. The burns were far too extensive, the injuries too numerous, and the environment far too controlled for a simple household mishap. Within minutes, paramedics alerted police that the scene looked like a homicide, not an accident. To understand how Donna ended up in that basement, you have to look at the relationship that preceded it. Donna Jones was a federal public servant, soft-spoken, well-liked, dependable. She married Hutt in 2007, believing she was starting a stable life with a partner who presented himself as protective and devoted. But over time, the dynamic shifted dramatically. According to friends and co-workers who later spoke with investigators, Donna became increasingly withdrawn. She stopped socializing, avoided sharing personal details, and deflected questions about bruises or sudden absences. What people didn't see was the growing control Hutt exercised behind closed doors. He monitored her movements, inserted himself into her financial decisions, and kept tight control over communication. The pattern wasn't explosive. It was gradual, tightening year by year, until Donna became isolated and dependent on him. By the fall of 2009, that control had escalated into something far more dangerous. Court evidence showed that Donna was living under constant intimidation. She grew thinner and more anxious. She missed events without explanation. When police arrived after paramedics raised concerns, they immediately secured the home. The bathtub Hutt pointed to as the site of the supposed accident showed no evidence of the kind of catastrophic slip he described. There were no burn patterns consistent with a single spill event. More importantly, investigators found the pellet gun, spent pellets, blood traces, and various household items used to cover wounds. The condition of the basement made clear that Donna had spent her final days in a state of extreme neglect and suffering. During questioning, Hutt gave several versions of what happened. First, he claimed Donna accidentally spilled boiling water while cooking pasta. Then he said she slipped in the bathtub. Later, he suggested she refused medical care despite his encouragement. Detectives quickly noted the inconsistencies. The injuries were too widespread, the stages of healing too varied, and the pellet wounds entirely unexplained by any of his stories. When confronted with these contradictions, Hutt shifted details again, admitting only that he should have done more. But his explanations never aligned with the forensic evidence. The autopsy provided the full picture. Donna had extensive third-degree burns, multiple healing and fresh fractures, deep bruises, and numerous pellet gun wounds. The pathologist told the court that the infection from the burns was advanced and that Donna had likely been in agony for days. Her death was attributed to septic shock, a result of prolonged injury and untreated infection. The expert testimony emphasized that with timely medical intervention, her survival would have been almost certain. The Crown's case focused on this central fact. Donna's injuries were inflicted over time, and Hutt intentionally withheld assistance until she died. Prosecutors presented evidence of control, isolation, and escalating harm. They showed Demeter. Jury emails and messages indicating Donna's growing fear. Witnesses testified that she had become quiet, withdrawn, and hesitant to challenge anything her husband said. The prosecution argued that Hutt exercised complete psychological domination, restricting her ability to seek help or leave the house. Throughout the trial, jurors heard from paramedics, forensic specialists, friends, and family. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs of the basement where Donna spent her final days starkly contrasted with Hutt's claims of providing care. The presence of pellet gun wounds directly contradicted his accident narrative, and the medical findings proved that the injuries could not have resulted from a single fall or spill. After considering all testimony, the jury reached its conclusion in March 2013. Mark Peter Hutt was found guilty of first-degree murder. The mandatory sentence was imposed immediately: life imprisonment with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. The verdict drew strong public reaction. Many Canadians were horrified by the extent of Donna's suffering and the length of time she went without medical attention. The case prompted discussions among support agencies about better identifying and responding to individuals isolated by controlling partners. Today, the Hutt case stands as one of the starkest examples of spousal homicide in Canadian legal history. It exposed how isolation, domination, and unchecked escalation can lead to catastrophic outcomes behind closed doors. Donna Jones's death has since been included in risk assessment training across the country, serving as a documented reminder of the warning signs often hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly quiet household. Jacob Daniel Forman, Kelowna, 2017. When police entered the Kelowna home on December 19, 2017, the quiet inside the house felt unsettling. Officers found Jacob Daniel Forman standing calmly, answering their questions without hesitation. As they began asking about his family, he stated, almost matter-of-factly, that his wife Clara and their two daughters, Yesenia, 8, and Karina, 7, were dead inside the home. He told them he had lost control during an argument with Clara, killed her, and then ended the lives of their children shortly afterward. The bodies were located in separate rooms. What stunned investigators even more was what came next. Forman admitted he had gone to work, attended church commitments, and carried on routine activities as if nothing had occurred. His composed demeanor in those first moments became one of the most unsettling details of the case. From the outside, the Formans appeared to be a stable family with deep roots in their community. They were active in their local church, attended group gatherings, and were known among friends as a quiet, seemingly devoted household. Jacob, originally from the United States, had worked in the construction and trade sector and participated in alcohol recovery groups. Clara, who came from Mexico, was cheerful, attentive, and devoted to her two daughters. Teachers and neighbors spoke warmly of the children, describing them as polite and engaged. Nothing in the family's public image hinted at the danger unfolding inside their home in the years leading up to the killings. But behind that outward normalcy, the marriage had become strained. Court documents later showed that Jacob struggled with alcoholism, a long-standing problem that caused tension in the relationship. He attended recovery programs but relapsed periodically. The arguments that followed these relapses became increasingly intense. Clara confided to others that she was concerned about the effect his drinking was having on the family, and she felt the pressure of trying to keep the household stable. Although the couple continued participating in church activities and community events, the private difficulties inside the home were deepening. On December 17, 2017, those tensions escalated into lethal violence. According to Forman's later confession, he killed Clara during an argument. He strangled her, an act that autopsy findings later confirmed. After she was dead, he moved through the home and killed their daughters individually. The girls, found in their own bedrooms, showed signs of strangulation, and one had additional blunt force injuries. The court later emphasized that each killing occurred separately, giving Forman time to reconsider, yet he continued with each act. What Forman did after the killings appeared incomprehensible to investigators. Rather than alerting authorities, he cleaned himself up and left the home the next morning. He returned to work, went to church functions, and interacted with people in his life without raising suspicion. By all accounts, he behaved normally. The bodies of Clara, Yesenia, and Karina remained inside the house undiscovered while he carried on with his daily responsibilities. 2 days passed before anyone grew concerned. A friend who hadn't heard from Clara reached out to police for a wellness check. Officers arrived at the residence and quickly realized something was wrong. Once inside, they found the 3 bodies and immediately secured the home as a crime scene. Forman was taken into custody for questioning. During the interview, he provided a straightforward confession. While he described the sequence of events, he refused to offer any meaningful explanation for why he killed his daughters after killing Clara. Detectives pressed for clarity, but he would not elaborate. His lack of explanation became one of the central unanswered questions in the case. After RCMP investigators gathered all physical evidence and documented the scene, the case moved through the courts. In July 2018, Forman appeared before the British Columbia Supreme Court and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, 1 count of second-degree murder for Clara, and 2 counts of first-degree murder for the children. The second-degree count indicated that while the killing of Clara was intentional, it did not meet the threshold of planning and deliberation required for first-degree. The guilty plea removed the need for a full trial, but the sentencing phase involved a detailed review of the forensic evidence and post-offense behavior. During the hearing, prosecutors outlined the methodical nature of the killings. They emphasized that each murder was separate and sequential, demonstrating a calm and deliberate progression. The autopsies confirmed the manner of death for all 3 victims, and forensic specialists discussed injuries sustained by one of the children. The Crown noted that Forman's actions after the killings, continuing his routine, leaving the bodies in the home, and interacting normally with others, showed composure rather than confusion or panic. Clara's family. Gilly traveled from Mexico for the proceedings, delivering emotional statements that described their grief and disbelief. They spoke about her warmth, her dedication to her daughters, and the pain of losing 3 family members in a single event. The court acknowledged the trauma experienced by both the immediate and extended families. In December 2018, the judge delivered a rare sentence under Canadian law. Forman received life imprisonment for each count, with parole ineligibility periods ordered to run consecutively for a total of 35 years. At the time, only a small number of cases in Canada had ever resulted in consecutive life terms. The sentencing decision highlighted the severity of the crime, the vulnerability of the victims, and the complete breach of parental trust. The judge remarked on the deliberate nature of the killings and the absence of any coherent explanation for them. In 2022, the Supreme Court of Canada issued a ruling that limited the use of stacked parole ineligibility. As a result, Forman's parole eligibility period was technically reduced to the standard 25-year term. However, the nature of his crimes and the findings in his case continue to carry significant weight, and any future parole considerations will face intense scrutiny. The killings had a profound impact on the Kelowna community. Residents who knew the family through church or school events were shocked, describing the deaths as completely unexpected. Memorials appeared near the home, with notes and flowers left by neighbors, family friends, and community members expressing their sorrow for Clara and the girls. Since then, the case has been referenced in discussions across British Columbia, about risk assessment in households where internal tension, concealed struggles, and addiction issues may intersect. It stands as a documented example of how deeply hidden dynamics can unfold inside an outwardly stable family. Jacob Daniel Forman remains incarcerated, serving his life sentence. The case remains preserved in court transcripts and police records, reflecting the grim reality behind a family that appeared, at least from the outside, to be living an ordinary and peaceful life. James Jamie Schwalm, Ontario, 2023. Fire crews arrived on a cold January morning in 2023 to find a black SUV engulfed in flames at the bottom of a snowy embankment near Scenic Caves Road in the Blue Mountains region of Ontario. When the blaze was extinguished, they discovered the body of 40-year-old Ashley Schwalm in the driver's seat. The scene looked like a tragic collision, followed by a vehicle fire. But as soon as investigators performed their preliminary assessment, something didn't add up. There were no impact injuries consistent with a crash, no sign she had tried to escape the flames, and the vehicle's position raised immediate suspicions. Days later, the autopsy confirmed the truth. Ashley had not died in the fire. She had been strangled before the SUV was ever set alight. The fire had been staged, and the man responsible was her husband, former fire captain James Jamie Schwalm, a professional trained to recognize and fight fires, now using that knowledge to disguise a homicide. To many who knew the couple, the revelation was almost unbelievable. Jamie and Ashley married in 2012 and built what seemed like a comfortable life in the Collingwood area. Jamie had risen through the ranks of the Brampton Fire Department, eventually becoming a captain. In the community, he had a reputation for leadership and calm under pressure. Ashley ran a design business, was well integrated in social circles, and was known as a devoted mother. They had 2 young children, a home in the Blue Mountains region, and were active in local gatherings. Nothing about their outward image suggested the turmoil that existed behind closed doors. Court records and interviews later revealed that the relationship had deteriorated significantly by 2021. Sources close to the couple described mounting tension, jealousy, and distrust. During this period, Ashley became involved in a relationship with their employer, and Jamie later began seeing the employer's former partner. Investigators would later uncover extensive digital evidence from Jamie's phone showing searches related to fires, vehicle damage, and insurance matters, all conducted in the months before Ashley's death. The pattern suggested more than curiosity. It pointed toward planning. On the night of January 25, 2023, an argument inside the Schwalm home turned deadly. According to the agreed statement of facts presented in court, Jamie strangled Ashley in their bedroom. After she died, he placed her body in the family SUV, drove it several kilometers away to a remote wooded area, and positioned the vehicle near an embankment. He then ignited the interior using an accelerant. The fire created enough damage to obscure certain details, but not enough to destroy the forensic evidence needed to uncover the truth. The next morning, Jamie contacted police and reported Ashley missing, claiming she had gone hiking early in the morning with their dog and had not returned. The story fell apart quickly. Search efforts were launched, but police grew suspicious when inconsistencies emerged. For one, the dog was found safe at home, unharmed. Jamie's account of Ashley's clothing and intended location shifted over time. Officers also noticed his unusual calmness, something that stood in stark contrast to most missing person cases involving spouses. The SUV was found later that same day by first responders after a passerby reported smoke in the area. Once Ashley's body was recovered and autopsy results were completed, investigators knew definitively that she was already dead before the fire began. There were no signs of smoke inhalation, and her injuries were consistent with manual strangulation. The fire was clearly set to destroy evidence. Digital forensic specialists examined Jamie's phone and computer, uncovering deleted messages, location data, and search history that contradicted his statements. Cell site records placed him in the area where the SUV was found, at times that did not match his version of events. Police also obtained surveillance footage showing his vehicle movements on the morning Ashley was reported missing, Everything pointed toward a staged scene. When confronted with the evidence, Jamie eventually admitted to causing Ashley's death, but claimed it happened during an argument and insisted the fire was an attempt to cover up what he described as a moment of panic. The court did not accept this explanation. Prosecutors emphasized the deliberate steps he took after Ashley's death, the transportation of her body, the remote location chosen for the fire, and his careful efforts to craft an alibi. They noted that he used professional knowledge from years as a firefighter to mask the cause of death. The case moved swiftly through the judicial system. In 2024, Jamie pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, avoiding a lengthy trial. During sentencing submissions, the Crown described the killing as calculated and cold, highlighting the breach of trust involved when a spouse takes the life of a partner and then attempts to present it as an accident. The defense argued for a lesser period of parole ineligibility, referencing Jamie's lack of a prior criminal record. But the severity of the crime, the staging of the fire, and the digital evidence contradicting his initial story weighed heavily against him. In February 2025, the Ontario Superior Court sentenced Jamie to life in prison with no chance of parole for 20 years. The judge emphasized the planning involved, the significant trust violation, and the fact that 2 children lost their mother because of their father's actions. The court also imposed restrictions preventing Jamie from contacting his children until they reach adulthood. Public reaction in Collingwood and the Blue Mountains area was one of devastation. Residents who knew the couple were stunned that someone so connected to public service, a fire captain trusted to protect the community, was capable of taking a life and attempting to conceal it. Local organizations used the case to bring attention to hidden marital stress, coercive behavior, and the importance of recognizing subtle warning signs. Today, Jamie Schwalm remains behind bars, serving his life sentence. His case continues to be referenced in discussions about staged crime scenes and the misuse of professional knowledge to obstruct investigations. The records left behind, autopsy findings, fire scene analysis, and digital evidence form one of Ontario's most significant recent examples of a husband who hid lethal intent behind an image of stability and respectability. Paul Bernardo, Ontario, 1990–1993. The turning point came in February 1993, when investigators in Ontario received forensic confirmation that a DNA sample taken from a man they had interviewed years earlier matched multiple crime scene samples from a long string of attacks in Scarborough. Within hours, officers moved in on a house in St. Catharines and arrested 28-year-old Paul Bernardo. While he was being processed, his wife, Carla Homolka, was brought in separately for questioning. She began cooperating soon after the arrest, telling detectives information that would transform their understanding of the case. What followed exposed one of the most disturbing criminal partnerships in Canadian history. Before the truth emerged, Bernardo and Homolka appeared to be an unusually attractive and charismatic couple. Friends and co-workers described them as confident, playful, and socially polished. Their appearance contributed to the Ken and Barbie label later used by international media. But their outward image hid a much darker dynamic. Bernardo had a pattern of dominating and manipulating those close to him, and within the relationship, that control only intensified. Homolka's involvement in the crimes became one of the most controversial elements of the entire investigation, and her role would later be scrutinized long after her plea agreement was accepted. Bernardo's criminal behavior did not begin in St. Catharines. Throughout the late 1980s, he was living in Scarborough, where a series of nighttime attacks terrified the community. Victims consistently described a young, clean-cut man who approached calmly before assaulting them, then disappeared without leaving a clear trace. Police interviewed dozens of potential suspects, issued composite sketches, and conducted neighborhood canvasses. Bernardo was interviewed at least once, after a former girlfriend expressed concerns about his conduct, but there was nothing investigators could directly tie to him at the time. In 1990, Bernardo met Homolka, and their relationship escalated quickly. They became engaged within months and maintained an image of a devoted, enviable couple. But the pattern of attacks in Scarborough continued. Behavioral analysts noted consistency in method and organization, and while no one yet knew Bernardo was responsible, the profile of the attacker was becoming clearer, controlled, methodical, and increasingly confident. In December 1990, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey disappeared from outside her home. Her remains were discovered in concrete blocks dumped in a lake near St. Catharines. The shocking nature of her death reverberated across the region. 6 months later, in April 1992, 15-year-old Kristen French was abducted while walking home from school. She was held for several days before being killed. Both cases involved extended captivity and deliberate planning. As the investigations progressed, police suspected that the same individual might be responsible for both deaths. Inside the Bernardo-Homolka relationship, tension was rising. Friends noticed that Homolka became withdrawn and anxious. In early 1992, she was treated in hospital after a violent assault in which Bernardo struck her with a flashlight. Following that incident, she separated from him. The police at this time were independently taking another look at the Scarborough files, and Bernardo was interviewed again. This time, officers collected a fresh DNA sample as part of a sweeping forensic effort. Months passed before the results arrived, but when they did, they conclusively matched Bernardo to multiple Scarborough crime scenes. Investigators immediately arranged for his arrest. Once he was in custody, attention turned to Homolka. She met with counsel and began cooperating with detectives in a series of interviews. She disclosed that she had participated in several of Bernardo's actions and provided detailed accounts of the events leading to the deaths of Mahaffey and French. She also told investigators that Bernardo had videotaped critical moments, though the tapes had not yet been found. With this new information, police obtained a warrant to search the couple's home in St. Catharines. Officers collected hundreds of items: clothing, written materials, video equipment, and numerous household objects potentially connected to the crimes. But the videotapes themselves remained hidden. Months later, after the plea agreement with Homolka had been finalized, members of Bernardo's defense team discovered the tapes concealed in a ceiling light fixture. They turned them over to the Crown, confirming the extent of the brutality and clarifying both Bernardo's actions and Homolka's involvement. Although the tapes contradicted parts of her earlier statements, her plea deal remained legally binding. In May 1995, Paul Bernardo went on trial in what became one of the most closely watched courtroom proceedings in Canadian history. The Crown presented forensic evidence linking him to the Scarborough attacks, testimony from investigators, behavioral analysis, and the recovered videotapes documenting what had happened inside the house. Homolka testified as part of her agreement, outlining her role and confirming Bernardo's planning and deliberate actions. The trial lasted several months. Family members of the victims attended the hearings, and the public followed every development. Through extensive media coverage, the Crown emphasized Bernardo's escalating violence, his calculated approach, and the similarities between the Scarborough cases and the later murders. Homolka's testimony, combined with the physical evidence, strengthened the prosecution's narrative that Bernardo orchestrated the crimes and maintained control throughout. After deliberation, the jury found Bernardo guilty on all major counts, including the murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. He received a life sentence with no eligibility for parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty available under Canadian law at the time for first-degree murder. After sentencing, he was declared a dangerous offender, a designation intended for individuals who pose ongoing risks, and that, in practice, makes his release highly unlikely. Public response to the verdict was intense. Many Canadians were horrified not only by the severity of the crimes, but also by the plea agreement granted to Homolka. Her role, her cooperation, and the timing of the videotape discovery became subjects of widespread debate, influencing national discussions about plea bargains, victims' rights, and transparency in high-profile investigations. Since his conviction, Bernardo has remained incarcerated, periodically returning to public attention through parole hearings and debates about offender management. Each hearing has drawn extensive scrutiny, reflecting the enduring impact of the case on Canadian society. Homolka completed her sentence and was released in 2005 under supervision, continuing to generate discussion about accountability and the boundaries of plea arrangements. Today, the Bernardo case remains one of the defining criminal investigations in Canada, shaping forensic practices, cross-jurisdictional cooperation, and public expectations around violent crime sentencing. It stands as a stark reminder of the danger concealed behind a polished public image, and the importance of forensic science in solving long-standing crimes. These husbands didn't just take lives, they shattered families, rippled through communities, and forced Canada to confront failures in its own justice system. Some of these cases changed laws, others reshaped investigative procedures, and a few stand as chilling reminders of how darkness can hide behind a wedding ring, a polished reputation, or a carefully crafted smile. Every story you've heard today came from real court files, real police records, and real people who never deserved what happened to them. And even years later, their cases still echo, warning us that the most dangerous individuals aren't always strangers in the night. Sometimes, they're the ones closest to home. Before you go, tell me in the comments, which case shocked you the most? I read every one, and your responses help decide the next documentary. If you want more deep-dive true crime breakdowns, check out the related videos on screen now. And if you're new here, subscribe to join us for the next investigation, because the stories we uncover matter, and the truth deserves to be told.